This is part 2 of reading Jim and Jamie Dutcher's The Wisdom of Wolves. We're on chapter 1. As the editor's note from the previous part 1, the editor states that each each author will be there'll be a clear distinction between who's speaking at what time. So right now, the first one to speak is Jim. So chapter 1, Earning Trust, Jim. The sound seems to come from everywhere at once. Outside there is nothing but the freezing black of a moonless January night. Jamie and I peered out into the darkness, but we see no movement, no source. From the deck of our camp, we can barely make out the surrounding mountains as snow clouds spill in from the west, and we stand listening. The howl grows more intense. From a movement, I think I can pick out individual voices coming from a definite direction, but then they dissolve and meld into a dissonant chorus. At times, it sounds like there could be 20 of them. We know there are only 8, but what a sound these 8 can make! It's eerie and mournful, exuberant and mysterious, all the contradictions of the American wilderness wrapped up in one sound. Looking at Jamie, I know it triggers the same conflicting emotions in her as it does in me. A strange mixture of loss and hope, a feeling of connection, a great sense of privilege, and maybe just a tinge of primordial awe. After a few minutes, the song dissolves. Voices drop out one by one. Somewhere in the dark there's a single final oop from a yearling wolf, still perfecting his howl, and then everything is silent. The Sawtooth Pack has just treated us to another pack rally, culminating in a riotous howl. We will never know precisely why they do it. Only they know their reasons. But if we could stay but if we can stay with them for 20 years, it would never get old. Jamie and I exchange smiles, and I squeeze her hand, acknowledging the precious experience we have just shared. Then we go back to the business of making dinner in silence. We called it Wolf Camp, quote unquote, a deceptively simple name for the little patch of tents, platforms, and fencing we had constructed. Wolf Camp was more than a place. It was the embodiment of all the inspiration, trial and error, and years of hard work that had gone into this project. It was the foundation of the entirely new way that we were telling the world about wolves. The project began as an idea: find a way to share the hidden lives of animals who were so scarce and so elusive that they had become virtually unknown. The project was to span a few years and culminate in a documentary film. It evolved into something far bigger than we ever could have imagined. What became our life's passion started in 1990 as an idea for an hour TV documentary. My film Cougar: Ghost of the Rockies had just aired on ABC Television's World of Discovery. Before I had made Rocky Mountain Beaver Pond for National Geographic, it felt like I was on a roll, and I was eager to find my next subject. I wasn't sure what it would be, but I already knew how I wanted to approach it. Many years earlier, I had read the work of Austrian zoologist Konrad Lorenz. One thing he wrote had stayed with me all that time, inspired me in my filmmaking, and has since informed everything I do. He wrote, quote, "The quickest way to learn the language of a species is to do so as a social partner," end quote. With that in mind, I made it my mission to give the audience of my wildlife films a personal experience with my animal subjects. I specifically chose animals who were very difficult to see, let alone film. Beavers aren't hard to locate, but they have the frustrating habit of hiding out in their lodge most of the day. When they do venture out on land, the slightest disturbance sends them dashing for their pond. Cougars are the opposite. They're unafraid but elusive. Catch a glimpse of one and you may never see it again. So I had to come up with the original ways to get close to these creatures, either by filming animals habituated to my presence in enclosures or with the beavers in our authentically constructed cutaway beaver lodge to bring viewers in close for an intimate look that they wouldn't get any other way. I knew that after Cougar and Beaver, my next film would have to do the same. As it turned out, I didn't find my ne- my net I didn't find my next subject. It found me on a hike in Wyoming's Absaroka Mountains. I crested a ridge and glimpsed what at that time was one of the rarest sights in the lower 48 states, a wolf. It was crossing a high alpine meadow more than 100 yards away, but it saw me, and the moment I saw it, by the time I brought my binoculars to my eyes, the wolf had darted over the next ridge. Here was an even greater challenge than the previous animals I had sought to film. Wolves weren't just elusive, they were very nearly gone from this part of the world. The wolf I had seen was probably a young disperser, a wanderer who had felt a wanderer who had left its pack and gone looking for a mate and new territory. It likely found no others and turned back for home, possibly in northern Montana or perhaps across the Canadian border. I found myself wondering about its inner life and its quest for companionship. I wanted to know this animal. Immediately, I began thinking about how to approach making a film about wolves. I recognize that they are the most misunderstood large animals in North America, which made the challenge even greater. If I could bring my audience in close, give them a personal experience, and show them the animals' inner life, people would understand and care. To achieve this, to achieve that goal, I had to create a setup similar to what I had done in filming beavers and cougars, a semi-wild situation where wolves would be accustomed to my presence and allow me to film them without changing their behavior. I would be filming in an enclosure, but I wanted to be as transparent as possible and make the project part of the story. A primary reason for this method was purely practical. There was simply no way to film truly wild wolves at a close range to achieve the depth I was looking for. I had to see what others had achieved after spending months in the field in Alaska and Canada, and the results were admirable but not at all intimate. Jamie and I had filmed wolves in Alaska, and I began to refer to the fairway creatures, as Canis lupus minusculus. They were always just tiny flecks in the lens. With the help of a very long telephoto lens, I was able to capture them moving about, occasionally playing or hunting. if I happened to be at the right place at the right time. But it wasn't terribly interested but I wasn't terribly interested in such a limited story. I wanted to know how they interacted, communicated, showed affection, and resolved conflicts. To do that, I had to see into their eyes. I had to be close enough to detect the nuances in their behavior and hear the sounds they made to one another. If I'd tried to get that close to wild wolves, I wouldn't have seen anything but their tails disappearing into the trees. I had deeper reasons for setting up the wolf project the way I did. By 1990, most conservationists knew that the federal plan to restore wolves to some of their former range. 5 years before reintroduction, anger and resentment were already brewing. The more extreme wings of cattlemen's associations and hunting groups had already pledged to, quote, shoot, shovel, and shut up, end quote. In other words, to shoot and quietly bury any wolf they could. In that climate, it would have been irresponsible for me to habituate wild wolves and get them comfortable being around man with a big camera. The next time someone pointed something at those wolves, it probably wouldn't be a camera. Thus, I set out to film North America's most controversial animal at the very moment when that controversy was reaching a boiling point and in the region of the country where the anti-wolf movement raged with the greatest fury. Suffice it to say, I took precautions. If I had started the process a year later, the anti-wolf opposition would have had time to organize and would have shut down the project. As it happened, I didn't fully grasp the scope of all the hatred, but my timing was perfect. My plan for creating an environment that would allow me to film wolves was emerging. The Wolf Project was ambitious to create a safe, natural habitat for wolves that allowed me uninterrupted filming. I needed to find the perfect spot. I required a location that was acceptable to an equipment truck to ferry in fence materials, but remote enough that strangers could not easily find it. I needed access by all-terrain vehicle in the wet months of spring and a snowmobile during the long months of winter. No, not only did we need to bring in all our food and the appropriate film gear and equipment, but also food for the wolves, usually road-killed elk or deer that we collected for them. I needed to I needed a place that was picturesque and had a variety of vegetation and topography in which to film. For the wolves, it needed to have a good balance of sunlight and shade and a constant water source that wouldn't dry up in the summer. So with my small crew of two, I started searching for the perfect location. I knew we were going to find what we needed only on Forest Service land. Private land bears too many signs of human development, so to find land still wild and natural, it was going to be land under federal protection. We made 17 trips into the backcountry on foot, by four-wheel drive, or by snowmobile. We looked into all the surrounding mountain ranges, the Pioneers, the Boulders/White Clouds, and the Sawtooths. One morning in early October 1990, after following an overgrown jeep trail behind a ranch and hiking a short distance into the foothills of the Sawtooths, we found ourselves standing in the middle of a wide grassy meadow. To one side ran a mountain stream. To another stood a grove of aspen. In front of us was a deep forest of lodgepole pine and spruce, out of which soared the gray walls of the Sawtooth Mountains. It was absolutely perfect. Next came the lengthy process of obtaining permits to operate on Forest Service land, a process I was familiar with from my previous films. To keep the project as secret as possible, I hired an out-of-state fencing company to construct a 25-acre chain link fence 10 feet high with a 6-foot apron facing in and on 10 feet high with a 6-foot apron fencing facing in and an overhang in all the corners so that even the most determined wolf couldn't dig under or climb over. After a year of preparation, the only thing missing was a pack of wolves. I suppose I was a little naive in those early months. Under pressure of a filming schedule, I felt I thought I could jumpstart a pack by borrowing adult wolves from 2 rescue centers, a male named a male we named Akai and a female named Makui. Makuyi. Apologies for any mispronunciation. The first official sawtooth wolves. I soon came to understand that a wolf pack is not something a human being can simply assemble at will. Makuyi was a beautiful, sweet wolf, and I was taken with her the moment I set my eyes on her. Unfortunately, as I was soon to discover, she suffered from cataracts, and her poor vision made her spook easily. The following year, when a litter of pups joined the adults, Mikui became increasingly fearful and spent most of her time as far away from the others as she could get. We brought in a skilled veterinary ophthalmologist and performed a successful corneal transplant, possibly the first such operation conducted on a wolf. I believe that that restoring her vision would enable her to integrate with the rest of the pack, but wolves don't work that way. Her status as a semi-outsider had already been established, and so rather than subject her to a life alone, I returned her to her original caretakers, where at least she would be in familiar company. The male was a big photogenic wolf named Akai, who certainly looked the part of alpha, like Makuyi. Akai had grown up at a wolf center and was used to people. I came to learn, though, being used to that a wolf's being used to people is not the same thing as a wolf's trust. My project required me to get close to these wolves, to film them feeding and during displays of dominance when were sorting out their pack hierarchy. But Akai didn't know my crew or me, or even Makuyi. As a result, he was unpredictable. He was usually fine around people, but occasionally something would frighten or anger him. He never injured anyone, but there were times he seemed as if he could have. I simply did not feel like I simply did not feel that Akai could be trusted, and probably Akai felt the same about me. It was a frustrating start, but today I look back at the learning curve of this period and realize that some of these early mistakes were what ultimately made the Wolf Project so successful. For wolves to live together in a pack, they must trust each other without question. For me to be able to live with these wolves, film their lives intimately, they needed to trust me. My knowledge of raising wolves evolved out of research far and wide, and most important, from an association with the wolf expert Eric Ziman, who had raised a captive pack in Bavaria. Eric himself was a graduate student of Konrad Lorenz, who had been such an inspiration to me. I met Eric at a wildlife film symposium in Bristol, England, and he stressed to me that that trust was the most important ingredient in the formation of a safe and healthy pack. Trust that could be achieved only by living with the wolves as social partners. This was a new idea for me and a challenging one. I had hoped that, as with the cougars, I could simply let these animals live their life without interference and they would reveal all their secrets to me. But cougars and wolves are very different creatures. Every expert I spoke to said or implied the same thing. These wolves must trust me absolutely or my work would be impossible. I was going to have to be more involved in their lives than I had anticipated. This meant that the wolves would need to get to know me from the moment they opened their eyes, so it was essential that we start with pups. As close as we got to the wolves, we never treated them like pets. The pups kept their wild ways, wrestling for supremacy and sorting out squabbles on their own. More than anything, wolves, like our beloved dogs, are social creatures. As pups, they need companionship, a sense of belonging, and the bonds of a pack. My original intent had been that this litter and another scheduled to come to us a year later would bond with the adults, Makuyi and Akai. But I soon realized that the adult wolves would never be the social partners the young wolves and I needed. The project rested solely with the pups that trusted us completely. I decided to return the adults to sanctuaries and relaunch the project with just the young wolves. Those two litters of those two litters of six pups, born a year apart, formed the core of the Sawtooth pack that, since then, legions of fans have come to recognize and follow. The first litter, born in 1991, produced the pack's two most famous faces, the brothers Kamatz and Lakota. Their markings were classic wolf, mottled gray fur with a charcoal gray mask, a light muzzle, and amber eyes. As pups and as adults, the two were difficult to tell apart from looks alone, but their behavior left no doubt as to who was who. Because wolves had long held a place in the culture of many Native American tribes, we had decided to use words from various indigenous languages to name these wolves. We called one of the new pups Kamats, the Blackfoot word for freedom, quote unquote. He was a confident and curious young wolf. He held his head and tail high and moved with a sure-footed lope toward any sound or perceived danger. By their second year, Kamatz had solidified his position as the alpha, the top of the pack hierarchy. His brother was just the opposite. We called him Lakota, which means friend in the Lakota uh, Sioux language. Apologies for any mispronunciation there. He was definitely friendly, but also timid and insecure, and his lack of confidence meant that the rest of the wolves sometimes picked on him. When there was any current of aggression within the pack, Lakota often bore the brunt of it. He was also playful, though, and was usually the one to instigate a game of tag. It seemed to be in his best interest to keep the pack's mood light, and he did this beautifully. In this first litter, there was also a shy, mysterious female with a coat of black and brown and piercing yellow eyes. We gave her the name Motaki, the Blackfoot word for shadow, quote unquote. Motaki was always the first to back down in any confrontation with her siblings, even more than Lakota. She was also playful, but she was also playful. For a time, wolves treated her as the pack omega at the bottom of the hierarchy. She was timid, but she was also the one who could work the pack into a playful mood and get a game of tag going. Like Lakota, she could keep the pack's mood light. Still, there were times when the other wolves would get a bit too aggressive, and when that happened, would go off by herself. I often wondered if she would ever be able to rise out of her omega stature, but I would never find out. One June evening, when Mataki was just 2 years old, a mountain lion scaled the tall fence of the wolf camp. The wolves' territory was large enough that the mountain lion could attack silently without the other wolves or humans being aware. It was the only time that the fence was ever breached, but gentle, Freudian slip there, I guess. But gentle Mataki's death shook us to the core, as it did the other wolves. That incident convinced me that wolves feel the pain of loss as sharply as we do. They grieve and they mourn and they miss each other. Of that I have no doubt. The second litter of pups joined the pack just after the loss of Mataki. In looks and in personality, they were as different as three wolves could be. We call one of them Matsi, the Blackfoot word for sweet and brave, quote unquote, and he fit his name perfectly. Of all the wolves, he was the lightest in color. His fur was almost beige, and his face bore only a delicate mask. He had a sunny disposition to match his looks. He was seldom aggressive, and he didn't stoop to fights over who ate first or who was slightly higher in rank. He he just kindly and gently assumed the role of Beta Wolf, the second highest ranking member of the pack. Dominance to all but the alpha. When we added new pups to the pack a few years later, Matsi took it upon himself to look after them. Excuse me. We also began to notice that Matsi subtly protected Lakota, who had been pushed to the Omega position after Mataki's death. Matsi was a peacemaker, a puppy sitter, and a friend to all. The second of the trio was a dark wolf we called Matomo. As a young wolf, he was almost completely black, and as he aged, his fur took on a dignified grizzle. His name was also a Blackfoot word meaning, quote, he who goes first, end quote. Matomo didn't actually go first, that was Kamat's. But he didn't go last either, that was Lakota. He just sort of did everything. He just sort of did everything on his own terms. Strangely, Matomo seemed to take a keener interest in our human activities than some of the other wolves did. He was not interested in direct contact with us. He was just very observant. When the rest of the pack was out of sight somewhere, we noticed Matomo sitting alone, watching us chop firewood or shovel snow with his keen yellow eyes, as though he were trying to figure us out. He was cool, smart, and enigmatic. Jamie often called him, quote, a man of few words, end quote. The last of the new letter was a flamboyant wolf we called Amani. His name was also a word from the Blackfoot language meaning speaks the truth, end quote, quote unquote. But it wasn't a very fitting name. He was a showman full of bluster and bravado. Unfortunately, when he wanted to show off, he often did so by picking on Lakota, straddling and nipping at the beleaguered Omega. For lack of a better word, he was the bully of the pack. On the other hand, when pups were around, Amani could be an absolute clown, indulging their every whim. A bully at one moment, playful and endearing the next, Amani definitely embodied the complex the complex and often contradictory inner life of a wolf. With the sawtooth pack stable and happy, I found myself making the biggest and happiest change in my own life. And my headset decided to turn off, so let's try this again. With the sawtooth pack stable and happy, I found myself making the biggest and happiest change in my own life. On a cold day in late December 1993, I picked Jamie up at the airport and whisked her off into the Sawtooth Mountains to sleep in a tent next to a pack of wolves, to be by my side for the rest of my life. It had begun with a simple smile 7 years earlier, boarding a flight to Washington, D.C. from Heathrow Airport. The smile in question belonged to a striking young woman with jet black hair, dark eyes, and a backpack slung over her one shoulder. I noticed she wore a beaded necklace distinctive of Eastern Africa. So I asked, quote, have you been in Africa? End quote. Excuse me. Quote, yeah, what gave it away? End quote. She asked with good-natured sarcasm. Then she flashed that smile again. Thus began the richest partnership of my life. Although we were not sitting together, we talked a bit during the long flight. I told her I had been visiting my sister, who operated a tented camp in a remote area of the Masai Mara in Kenya. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce it. She said she had been in Zimbabwe on safari with a girlfriend, touring the national parks and photographing wildlife. I described the thrilling time I had spent photographing cheetahs as they hunted gazelles in the savannah. It was clear she was as passionate about animals as I was. In fact, she had just taken a job in the veterinary hospital in Washington's National Zoo. It took me until we were at the baggage claim area to summon my courage and say I would be back in DC 2 weeks later. Could I give her a call? To my surprise, she said yes. That spring and summer of 1987, I flew from Idaho to Washington every month to finish the Beaver film. Each time I visited, Jamie and I met for dinner. Our conversations were lively and engaging as we tossed around ideas for future films, but I always felt that something was holding me back. I was still suffering from the sting of a divorce, and I thought I was not interested in marriage again. There was the issue of my two children and the age difference between us, and there was also Jamie's established East Coast life. And so it did not come as a surprise to me when Jamie called at the end of summer to say that she had become engaged. I listened to her words from 2,000 miles away with the detachment of a condemned man. My entire being, my entire being told me that I should say something, anything, to make her change her mind. But it seemed too far gone. With too many obstacles and so much distance, years passed and everything changed in her life and in mine. 7 years after that first chance meeting, our shared Sawtooth Pack adventures began. From the moment Jamie arrived at Wolf Camp, her excitement was infectious. She kicked off a brand new phase of work, a brand new camp, and additions to the pack. This city girl from Washington, D.C. jumped in with both feet. Her arrival inspired me to reinvent Wolf Camp and begin an entire new phase of filming. My goal had always been to capture the wolves' natural behavior on film by getting them as used to my presence as possible. Until that point, my tented camp was located next to but outside the pack's domain, which meant I had to enter a double gate to film them. Wolves are incredibly curious and inquisitive. Although I tried to be inconspicuous, whenever I came through the gate, laden with gear, they would stop whatever they were doing and come to investigate. Their curiosity was endearing, but it interrupted their natural wolf behavior. The solution was to end all the comings and goings and to merge our world with theirs. Essentially, we created a small enclosure for humans within a vast territory for wolves. To keep the wolves from stealing our gear, we surrounded our camp with chain link fencing, and the camp's center stood an 8-foot high platform upon which we erected a yurt, a large round tent originally used by nomadic horsemen in Central Asia. With our human activities in full view of the wolves, we quickly became uninteresting. The platform itself provided a great vantage point for observing and filming without their even noticing what we were up to. And when we slipped quietly through a gate and into the pack's territory, they often didn't even bother to look up, which is exactly what we wanted. For me, this merging of our two worlds was the fulfillment of the Konrad Lorenz quote that had inspired me many years earlier. We were to, we were no longer observers of wolves. We had become their social partners, and they opened up their lives to us as never before. From that point forward, every second of film, every still photograph, every observation we made was richer and more intimate. As I enjoyed unprecedented filming opportunities, Jamie developed a passion for recording the language of wolves. We knew that for people to care about wolves, they had to see them up close. We came to realize that it was equally important to hear them. Jamie's pursuit grew into a passion. She delighted in the way the changing atmosphere of the mountains had such a profound effect on the sound of wolves howling, and she set about to capture all the different moods: flat howls on a foggy day, howls that echoed off the mountains on a clear winter night, the lovely dissonance of a group howl, and the mournfulness of a wolf howling alone. Of course, the wolves presented her with a repertoire of other sounds that one would never hear without the benefit of proximity and a boom microphone. As the wolves spoke to one another, Jamie amassed a huge library of growls, whines, snarls, yips, and sounds that she categorized as Chewbacca noises, quote unquote, their own verbalizations uncannily similar to those of the Star Wars character. They always put up they always put a smile on our faces. Jamie's meticulous recording of their language deepened the intimacy that we were able to achieve. I can't imagine how we'd talk about wolves without that part of the story. With the new with the new momentum that followed Jamie's arrival, we decided it was time to introduce some new characters into our group of 5 males. Most important, the pack needed females to be complete. We brought 3 new wolf pups into the pack, 2 female and 1 male. By this point, we had reached an agreement with the Nez Perce tribe of northern Idaho to provide a permanent home for the pack once our Forest Service permit had expired. The Nez Perce uh, were also slated to oversee the reintroduction of wolves to Idaho. So when it came to naming these 3 new wolves, we decided to use the words Nez from the Nez Perce language. 2 of the pups were siblings, a male and a female. To the girl, we gave the name Wyakin. Wyakin. Let's go with Wyakin. In Nez Perce lore, a Waikin is a spirit guide that appears to children, teaching them life lessons and special songs. Our Waikin was a feisty spirit, lively and full of mischief. She loved nothing more than rough and tumble play with her brother Wahats. Wahats. Um, yeah, his name meant likes to howl, quote unquote, which seemed fitting for a wolf. He was a little more reserved than his sister, and later in life he relieved Lakota as Pac Omega. Even as they grew into adulthood, Wahats and Wyakin remained inseparable. The two were more than siblings, they were fast friends. The third pup was a black female. As we struggled to think of a name for her, a friend started calling her Black Lassie. Of course, that wouldn't do at all. In Nez Perce, the word for black was Chemuk Chemuk, and the word for girl or lass was Ayet. Chemek Chemek Ayet was not a name that rolled off the tongue, so we simply called her Chemek. She was born to different parents than Wahats and Wyakim, and she had a very different temperament. She was timid like Lakota, but where he merely lacked confidence, she was outwardly nervous and skittish. Early on, Wahats and Wyakin keyed in on her insecurity and often made a game of picking on her. Thus, it was to our surprise, and probably to hers, when 2 years later she came into estrus and Kalmus mated with her, making her the alpha female of the pack. Chemek never assumed the alpha role gracefully. With newfound authority, she got her revenge on Wyakin, paying back the other females' prior harassment and more. The hierarchy of a wolf pack is generally divided along sexual lines. An alpha female is dominant over other females and an alpha male over the other males. But Chema crossed the line and relieved her insecurity by picking on Lakota, a male 3 years her senior. Despite her shortcomings, Chema entered motherhood with the assurance of a proper alpha female. In a den she dug herself, in a location she had selected for reasons known only to her. Chemek gave birth to 3 pups. By all accounts, they were the first wolves born in Sawtooth Mountains for more than 50 years. All 3 were dark like her mother, a male, Piyip, and 2 females, Ayet and Mutaki II. For us and for the viewers of our film Wolves at Our Door, the birth of these 3 pups was timely. Just 1 year earlier, in 1995, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service had released the first wolves back into Idaho. These reintroduced wolves were probably digging dens and having pups 100 miles north of us at the very same spring. That very same spring. As a new act of beginning for wolves in America, the curtain was coming down on our wolf project in the Sawtooths. Our Forest Service land use permit was expiring, yet we planned to provide for the Sawtooth Pack for the rest of their lives. It was against the law to set them free, and more important, they had lost what they needed most to survive in the wild, a fear of humans. On an August evening in 1995, we loaded 8 carefully sedated adults and three wide-awake, curious pups into transport crates. In the cool of darkness, we made the 7-hour journey north and carried them to their new home. Wolves seldom live longer than 10 years, and it is now more than 20 years since we released them into their new home. The visits we made from time to time were full of joy and tears in equal measure. The wolves always remembered us and rushed to greet us as old friends, whining, sniffing, and showering us with licks, even awkwardly trying to sit in our laps, perhaps remembering their days as pups a long time ago. As years went by, we would receive heartbreaking news that one had passed, then another. Feisty Waiken, fearless Kamats, gentle Matsi, Piyip, one of Kamat's, and Chemuk's three pups, was the last to die in 2013. In one day, 98,000 people shared his passing with us over the internet. Emotional messages poured in. The Sawtooth Pack had touched the hearts of people around the world. We had given them names, but those were only for human ears. We never attempted to teach the wolves their names or to call them to us. We only had contact with them if they initiated it. Often they could Often they did choose to approach us and we would sit quietly, welcoming their company. They were free to ignore us or engage us on their own terms, just as they were free to sort out their own issues, establish their own hierarchy, and simply be themselves. This made the moments of connection that we did have with them all the more precious. We will never know for sure how they looked upon us. Were we members of their pack or familiar friends? We asked them to be ambassadors for their kind, to help people understand their ways. We asked them to speak for past wolves who had been feared and persecuted, and for new wolves taking their first steps into an uncertain future. The Sawtooth Pack rose to this challenge with more grace than that we could have hoped for. We gave them our pledge that we would care for them, respect their space, and honor their message. In return, they gave us their trust. We will never forget that gift. The pups. That's the end of chapter 1.